Hello and welcome to another U.S. Stamp Categories video. Today I'll give you the rundown on U.S. airmail stamps. First, what are airmail stamps? Airmails were stamps that paid postal rates for mail sent by air. This usually meant airplane, but included more unusual aircraft as well, like hot air balloons, dirigibles, and more. When did they start? America's very first airmail stamps were issued in 1918, the year regularly scheduled U.S. airmail service began. Why did they start? Airmail stamps were created to promote the new mail service and then later to simplify the payment of complicated postage rates for mail delivered by air. How did they start? The first authorized U.S. airmail flights took place at an aviation meet in Long Island, New York in 1911. They were overseen by Postmaster General Frank Hitchcock and were the first authorized U.S. airmail flights, lasting from September 23 to October 1, 1911. After several years of experimental airmail flights at fairs, carnivals, and air meets across America, in 1917 Congress allocated $100,000 to establish a regular airmail service the following year. The Post Office Department began advertising for airplanes, but canceled their plan after the Army volunteered to operate the airmail service to give their pilots more cross-country flying experience. Army pilots handled airmail flights for the first 3 months before the Post Office took over with civilian pilots and planes on August 12, 1918. The first regularly scheduled U.S. airmail flight took place on May 15, 1918, between New York and Washington, D.C. Congress authorized airmail postage of 24 cents per ounce, with 14 cents covering airmail service and 10 cents for special delivery service. This stamp covered that rate and also spawned one of the most famous U.S. stamp rarities in history, the inverted Jenny. On July 15, 1918, the airmail rate was lowered to 16 cents per ounce, with 6 cents covering airmail service and 10 cents covering special delivery, and then lowered again to 6 cents on December 15th, with special delivery rate having been removed from the cost. At first, the public was hesitant to use airmail as it was expensive and not much faster than mail carried by train. The Post Office Department responded by increasing the number and distance of scheduled routes. This included establishing a transcontinental airmail route from New York to San Francisco, completed on September 8, 1920. In the beginning, planes only carried mail during the day. The first night flight from San Francisco to New York took place on February 22, 1921, and the first regular transcontinental airmail flights with night service began July 1, 1924. The transcontinental route was broken up into 3 zones, with postage rates set at 8 cents per ounce per zone. These stamps were issued to cover the new rates. Here are some examples of U.S. airmail stamps. In 1927, airmail rates were changed to 10 cents per half ounce, regardless of distance. Since most mail was over that weight, this 20-cent stamp was created. It and the other stamps issued around that time were made larger and more distinct than earlier airmail stamps, making it easier for postal clerks to distinguish them from regular postage stamps. On May 21, 1927, U.S. airmail pilot Charles Lindbergh became the first aviator to fly solo nonstop across the Atlantic Ocean. The public demanded a stamp commemorating the accomplishment, and the Post Office delivered with the issue of this 10-cent airmail stamp. It's the very first U.S. stamp to commemorate a living person, although Lindbergh isn't actually pictured. Lindbergh's flight had a huge impact, increasing the popularity of air transport and ensuring a bright future. As of the introduction of this 1928 5-cent airmail stamp, the Post Office Department officially restricted the use of airmail stamps to mail carried by air. The stamps could no longer be used as substitutes for regular postage. These are the famous 1930 Graf Zeppelin airmail stamps. They were used exclusively on mail carried aboard the Graf Zeppelin from Europe to the Americas. This revolutionary airship was built for the U.S. by Germany as payment of its World War I debts. These stamps were equivalent to a workman's wages for an entire week at their time of issue and sold for just 5 weeks. All this and the short-lived service of the Graf Zeppelin have made these stamps very scarce and desirable today. This is the 4th U.S. stamp picturing the Graf Zeppelin. It's affectionately known as the Baby Zepp by collectors due to its lower face value. It was produced in 1933 to help pay for the Graf Zeppelin's flight to the Chicago World's Fair titled A Century of Progress. It was a huge deal when the first plane, a Martin M130 flying boat, departed California on November 22, 1935, for the very first Transpacific airmail flight. The plane completed its historic 8,000-mile island-hopping journey across the Pacific on November 29th. This U.S. airmail stamp honors the so-called China Clippers and covered postage rates for mail flown on one leg of the Transpacific journey, either San Francisco to Hawaii, Hawaii to Guam, or Guam to Manila. The other China Clipper stamps were issued 2 years later when the Transpacific service was extended to Hong Kong and China, earning the planes their nickname. Before planes, there were balloons. This 1959 7-cent airmail stamp pictures Jupiter, the hot air balloon that carried the first officially sanctioned airmail of the United States on August 17, 1859. In 1963, aviation icon Amelia Earhart became the first woman pictured on a U.S. airmail stamp. Earhart was the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean solo, and the first person to do it twice. She advanced the role of women in aviation during the early days of flight. This airmail stamp commemorates the first moon landing in 1969. While technically an airmail stamp, it's also the first jumbo-sized U.S. commemorative stamp. The engraved master die accompanied the Apollo 11 astronauts all the way to the moon's surface. Also, an envelope bearing a proof of the stamp was canceled inside the space capsule. This was the final series of U.S. airmail stamps, the Scenic American Landscape Series. According to the USPS, the series was issued to commemorate the mountains, canyons, and swamps that comprise our country's diverse and majestic terrain. Each stamp satisfied the international mail rate at the time of its issue. That's all for now. Let us know what your favorite U.S. airmail stamp is in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to be alerted anytime we post a new video. See you next time, and as always, happy collecting.